Hi there, my name is Emily Mitchell. I'm the town clerk in the town of Harwich, and I'm excited to talk with you today about different ways that you can vote in elections. Now, something to mention at the start is that the different ways that you can vote might vary from community to community and based on the type of election. So when we're thinking about types of elections, we can generally think of them in three different categories. We have our local elections, our state general elections, and then our primary elections. So local elections are those where you vote on candidates and questions that are specific to your town or your city. So think about your select boards, your city councils, your school committees, maybe your library trustees. Some questions you might typically see would be adopting local bylaws or approving money for big projects. Local elections are always nonpartisan, so when you see candidates on the ballot, you won't see any type of party affiliation next to their name. For state general elections, those are the ballots where we're electing our statewide and federal offices. So think governor, president, representative to the House and Senate, auditors, district attorneys. So again, those are our state and federal offices that we see on those state general election ballots, and then also statewide ballot questions. So in recent years, we've seen the question to eliminate the MCAS as a high school graduation requirement, different voter ID questions. We have a lot coming up before us in the 2026 election cycle. So again, those statewide issues that are going to be before voters all across Massachusetts. Now, state ballots are partisan elections. So when you look at candidates, you're going to see a party designation next to their name. That might be Republican, Democrat, or a third party designation like Libertarian or Green Party. The next type of election that we think of are primary elections. So primary elections are the way that parties choose their nominee to be on that state election ballot. So they always come before the state general election, and that's the way of essentially narrowing the political field for the parties. So for example, in 2026, we'll see a variety of statewide offices, and you'll see a primary election in September that comes before the general election in November. And you might see on that primary election ballot any number of candidates seeking the party nomination. So for example, there'll be a Democrat ballot. There might be 5 registered Democrats running to be the Democratic nominee for, say, governor in this example. Same will be true for the Republican ballot. There may be 2, 3, 4, 5 nominees, all seeking to be the Republican candidate on the general election ballot. So the winner in a primary election is the person who becomes the nominee, and then their name appears on the general election ballot a few months later. So we have our local elections, we have our general elections, and then we have our primary elections. And the ways you can vote do vary depending on which election type is in front of us. So thinking about our state elections first, both the primaries and the general elections, you're going to have 3 different options available to you for voting. You're going to have the option to vote early by mail, early in person, or in person on election day. We'll take them one at a time and kind of walk through step by step what that process would look like for you as the voter. So if you're voting early by mail, your process is going to start by sending an application to the town clerk's office where you're registered to vote. We have a variety of applications available to you, both paper copies, some that will be sent to you automatically by the state, and then also the option to apply virtually online. So generally the process starts with an application. Before each state election, the Secretary of State's office, which is the chief election official at the state level, will send all registered voters a postcard vote by mail application. So it's going to be sent to you at whatever mailing address you have on file with the town clerk's office where you're registered, and it will give you the option to say, I would like to vote by mail in the upcoming election. So if we're thinking about the next round of state elections, we're looking at the 2026 midterm state elections. So our primary election will be in September 2026. And so if you're already registered to vote, you can look forward to receiving a postcard in the mail at the address you have on file. And it will give you the option to say, I would like to receive a mailed ballot for this primary election. Now in Massachusetts, we're what's called a semi-closed primary state. That means that everyone who's a registered voter can vote in the election, no matter what party you're registered with, or if you're unenrolled or independent, you'll have the option to vote in the election. But the options available to you will differ a little bit. So if you are enrolled in one of the two main political parties, Republican or Democrat, so you're registered with that party, you will automatically receive that party's ballot if you choose to vote by mail. So let's say, for example, you're a registered Republican and you want to vote by mail in the primary election. The only option available to you is to vote that Republican ballot. And so that's the ballot you would choose to help select who will be the Republican nominees for each of those state offices. Same is true if you're a registered Democrat. You would only have the option of receiving the Democrat party ballot, and then you would be choosing the Democrat nominees for each of the statewide offices. Now, if you're unenrolled, which is just the technical term Massachusetts uses for people who are independent or not affiliated with a political party, you're still able to vote in the primary election, but you have to choose which party ballot style you would like to receive. So you can only vote one ballot. You do have to choose one or the other, and you'll be prompted to do so when you fill out that application. You'll see the option of Republican or Democrat, and you must choose one or the other. It won't change your political affiliation, so even after you vote in the election, you will still be unenrolled. So choosing, for example, the Democrat Party ballot for the September state primary election won't register you as a Democrat. It's just your ballot selection for that one election. So you start by filling out that application. You send it into your local town clerk's office where you're registered to vote. It is very, very important that you sign that application. We're not able to process your request if we don't have your signature. But once we receive that, that's what will trigger us to send you a ballot in the mail. You can choose whatever mailing address you'd like. So let's say, for example, maybe your home address where you live with parents or family is in Harwich, and that's typically where you receive mail, but maybe you'll be in college or doing another work opportunity elsewhere temporarily. If you'd like to use that as your mailing address for ballot purposes, you're welcome to do so. So anywhere you're going to be, we can send you a ballot by mail. When you get that ballot by mail, it'll come with a full kit. You'll get the ballot itself, a postage prepaid return envelope to make it easy for you to send that ballot back to us. And then you'll also see a security envelope. That security envelope is going to be really important. Once you mark your ballot, take as much time as you need from the comfort of your home. You're going to place that marked ballot into the security envelope. Again, really important that you sign that envelope so that we can verify that it's really you returning the ballot inside, So you'll mark the ballot, place it in that security envelope, sign the outside of the envelope, and then you can return it back to us. And again, we try to make it as easy as possible for you to get that ballot back to your town clerk's office. You can send it back by mail using that postage prepaid return envelope. You can also, if you're close by, you can drop it by our office during business hours, or we have drop boxes available 24/7 at the town hall. Depending on what community you're in, there should be comparable options available to you to bring it to your local clerk's office or to another secure Dropbox location. You'll want to make sure to keep timelines in mind. So for the vast majority of elections, you'll want to make sure that marked ballot is received in your clerk's office by the close of polls on election day. So it has to be received on election day by the clerk's office by the close of polls, which is often 8 p.m. It's not sufficient for it to be postmarked. So we actually have to have it in hand and ready to count on election night. For state elections, there is a little bit more of a wiggle room. If you're mailing the ballot, as long as it is postmarked by election day, it can be received in the clerk's office up to 3 days later. So again, that's really specific to those state general elections. All the other elections, primary elections, local elections, special elections, it's important that that ballot get back by close of polls. So keep that in mind as you're marking your ballot and planning about how you'll return it. We want to make sure everyone who wishes to vote is able to have their vote counted, so do keep that in mind. So I mentioned the postcards are one way to apply. You can also always access paper applications at your local clerk's office, or we often have them linked as, a PDF on our websites. And there's also a way to request your ballot online. This is through the Secretary of State, again, the chief election officer for the state. Secretary of State's office has an online portal where you can request your mailed ballot. I should mention while we're talking about voting by mail that the state of Massachusetts does differentiate between a vote by mail ballot and an absentee ballot. Now, your experience as the voter is going to be identical. You're going to submit an application, you're going to receive your ballot in the mail, you're going to mark it, and you're going to return it to your clerk's office. The distinction comes on who's eligible to apply and when you can vote using one method or the other. So early voting by mail, which we've just been talking about, is an option that's available to all voters. They don't have to meet any qualifying criteria. The reason that there's also this absentee component is because sometimes this vote by mail option is not available in certain communities for their local elections. So I mentioned state elections, primary elections, you can always vote by mail. For local elections, communities may choose not to make that option available. And then there's this category of absentee, which is always available. So folks who wish to vote by absentee ballot do need to qualify. There's 3 criteria. You only need to meet one of the 3. The first is if you're going to be out of town on election day, so you're not able to vote in person. The second would be if you had any religious reason where you wouldn't feel comfortable voting at your polling location. And the third reason would be if you had a disability that prevented you from accessing your polling location. So if you meet any of those 3 criteria, you're able to vote absentee, and towns never opt out of absentee voting. So no matter the type of election, no matter what community you're in, if you meet one of those 3 criteria, you can vote absentee in that election. So that distinction on the back end is the key difference between vote by mail, which you'll hear folks talk about a lot, and absentee voting. Vote by mail not always available, absentee voting always available, but again, your voter experience is going to be the same. You'll submit an application, we'll mail you a ballot, you'll mark it, and you'll return it to us. So voting by mail, great way to vote in elections. The next option I talked about earlier was the option to vote in person early. So we're still talking about pre-election day, early voting. This is in person. Again, this version of voting is always available for state general elections and for primary elections, and it may be available for local elections. This is another area where towns have the option to opt in or opt out of offering in-person early voting. So that will vary based on the type of election and your community. Those state elections, always available. So for in-person early voting, essentially it's going to look like a mini election day. You will go to the designated in-person early voting location in your town, which is typically the town clerk's office, but towns might choose to designate another location based on space needs and staffing. But oftentimes it's your town clerk's office. There's going to be set windows where in-person early voting is available to you. And so you'll go during those windows of time, check in at the in-person early voting location. It's going to look very similar to voting in person on election day. You're going to give your name and address to an election worker. That election worker is going to check you in, and they're going to issue you a ballot. There will be voting booths set up in this designated area, so you can take your ballot. You'll go to one of those voting booths and mark your ballot. And then similar to early voting by mail, you're going to take that marked ballot when you're done, and you're going to seal it in a security envelope, the same type of security envelope you would have used during the mailed ballot process. So you're going to seal that marked ballot in the security envelope, sign the outside, just like you would have with the mailed ballot, and then you're going to check out. So you're going to check out with another team of election workers, share your name and your address where registered, and deposit that ballot enclosed in the security envelope in a designated location. Very simple, don't need to meet any qualifying criteria, don't need to apply in advance. You're welcome to just show up during those designated hours. Again, this does vary a little bit from election to election. So generally speaking, for primary elections, towns will offer 1 week of in-person early voting hours. The hours themselves may vary from town to town based on the size of your community, but there will always be weekday hours and weekend hours during that 1 week of in-person early voting. For our state general elections, that time period is extended, so we have 2 weeks. And again, you'll have 2 sets of weekends hours. The hours themselves may vary from town to town, and 2 weekdays worth of voting hours as well. So 2 weeks for our general elections, 1 week for our primary elections, no application needed. You don't need to meet any qualifying criteria. You just go to the designated location during the designated windows of time. And then our last option for voting is probably the one you're most familiar with. That's voting in person on Election Day. So on Election Day, polls will be open at designated polling locations. It is important that you go to the right location. And this is another place where your local town clerk can be an invaluable resource. We often have information available on our websites for how to know which voting precinct and polling location you should go to. The Secretary of State's office also has a polling location finder tool, so you can enter in your personal information, your name and your address where you're registered, and it will tell you what your precinct number is and what polling location you should report to on Election Day. But if you don't want to check out the website and you're not comfortable using those online tools, don't hesitate to just call or email your clerk's office. We're always happy to look up that information for you and to make sure you get to the right place. So once you know where to go, you'll go to that location on Election Day. Polls, again, hours can vary, but a fairly standard format for hours is 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So there's a fairly long window of time on that designated Election Day for voters to participate. You'll go to that location, and again, you're going to check in. So you'll start by talking to election workers. You will give them your name and your residential address where you're registered to vote. They'll check you in on a voter list. That could be an electronic voter list or a paper list. They'll check you in that you are voting in that election, and then they will issue you a ballot and a ballot marking pen. You'll take your ballot and your pen and you'll go to one of the voting booths that are set up in that space. You'll take as long as you need to mark your ballot, and then when you're done, you'll go to check out with another team of election workers. So you go to that second team of election workers, again, give your name and your address so they know that everyone who has checked in has also checked out. They'll check you off on the voter list at the checkout table. And then that's when you will deposit your ballot in a machine called a tabulator. It's just the fancy word for the machine that takes and counts your ballot to produce election results. So you'll place that in your tabulator, you'll get the ever-coveted I voted sticker, and you'll be on your way. So 3 options that are available to you. Again, these are going to vary from town to town and from election to election, but you'll know that there's a variety of options available to you always, and I hope that you will consider your local town clerk's office as a resource. Please don't hesitate to call us during election season or all year round. We're always happy to help and to answer your questions and to make sure that you can vote successfully in these really important events. So we look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much.